Story 1. I am Laura Thompson, a 22-year-old college student majoring in veterinary science. To help pay for my education, I took a part-time job at a local Subway restaurant. The store was located on Elm Street, a relatively quiet area known for its old-fashioned charm. The Subway, however, had an odd reputation among locals. It was a small, unassuming place with its familiar green and yellow decor, but whispers of strange occurrences always surrounded it. On my first day, the manager, Mr. Miller, introduced me to my duties, making sandwiches, handling customers, and cleaning. Everything seemed straightforward. The store had a calming routine, but there was something off about the back room, a place I'd rather avoid. The employees warned me about the back room's peculiarities, but I dismissed their comments as mere rumors. I brought my cat, Whiskers, with me sometimes. He was a friendly, curious tabby who enjoyed exploring new places. I thought his presence might be a comfort during my shift. Little did I know, Whiskers would become central to the chilling events that followed. Over the weeks, strange occurrences began to unfold. Objects would inexplicably move and the lights occasionally flickered. The back room, where we stored supplies, seemed to have an unnerving aura. Whiskers started avoiding it altogether, hissing and arching his back whenever he ventured near. One evening, as I was closing up, I heard Whiskers meowing frantically from the back room. I rushed to find him pacing in front of the storage shelves, his eyes wide with fear. I noticed a subtle, unpleasant odor in the air, reminiscent of something decaying. I checked the area thoroughly, found nothing out of place. Determined to uncover the source of Whiskers' distress, I decided to investigate further. While cleaning, I found a small, dusty box partially hidden behind a stack of old cans. Inside was a collection of old, yellowed photographs depicting the restaurant's early years. The images showed employees and customers from decades ago, their expressions stiff and unnatural. One photograph caught my attention. It showed a woman standing in front of the restaurant, her face obscured by shadows and an unsettling smile. The odd incidents persisted, and my anxiety grew. Whiskers remained on edge, his behavior becoming increasingly erratic. I began hearing faint, disembodied whispers, especially when I was alone in the store. The whispers seemed to come from nowhere, echoing through the empty aisles and fading before I could locate their source. One night, as I was closing up alone, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the store into darkness. Using my phone's flashlight, I navigated through the dimly lit space, my heart pounding in my chest. The cold air made my breath visible, and the oppressive silence was broken only by the sound of Whiskers' anxious meows. As I approached the back room, I saw a shadowy figure near the storage shelves. The figure was tall and indistinct, its form shifting like a dark mist. Whiskers hissed and arched his back, clearly agitated. I tried to approach the figure, but it dissipated before my eyes, leaving a cold draft in its wake. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into complete darkness. The following day, I was determined to get to the bottom of the strange occurrence. I decided to explore the back room more thoroughly. Whiskers had taken to hiding in a corner of the store, avoiding the back room altogether. I searched the area, moving aside boxes and inspecting every corner. I discovered a hidden door partially obscured by a stack of old, dusty crates. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. With my heart racing, I descended the stairs, finding myself in a small, decrepit basement. Air was heavy with dust and a musty odor, and the walls were covered in strange symbols and markings. In the center of the basement was a makeshift altar, covered in old, faded candles and strange artifacts. The symbols on the walls seemed to be part of a ritualistic pattern, and the atmosphere was thick with a palpable sense of dread. As I approached the altar, I noticed Whiskers cautiously following me, his eyes wide with fear. As I examined the altar, Whiskers suddenly darted towards a corner of the basement, his meows growing frantic. I followed him and discovered a small, concealed compartment behind the wall. Inside was an old journal, its pages filled with disturbing entries about unexplained phenomena and dark rituals performed at the restaurant. The journal detailed the summoning of malevolent entities and their binding to the location. The entries spoke of a powerful entity that had been summoned and bound to the Subway restaurant, causing the strange occurrences and disturbances reported over the years. Whisker's behavior was no longer a mere coincidence. He was reacting to the presence of these dark forces. As I read the journal, I felt an oppressive weight in the air, and the whispers grew louder, forming coherent phrases of torment and suffering. Whiskers seemed to sense the growing intensity of the presence, his fur bristling and his meows turning into desperate cries. The basement grew colder, and the shadows seemed to come alive, swirling and writhing around me. The whispers became a cacophony of anguished voices, and the temperature dropped further. Whiskers hid behind me, his eyes darting around in terror. Determined to confront the malevolent entity, I decided to perform a cleansing ritual based on the information from the journal. Armed with salt, candles, and holy water, I prepared for the ritual in the basement. The atmosphere was thick with dark energy, and the shadows twisted and contorted, forming a looming, menacing figure. The ritual began, and the air grew colder, the whispers becoming a deafening roar. The dark figure materialized, its form shifting and contorting in a grotesque display of malevolence. Whisker's cries grew louder, and the shadows seemed to reach out towards us, as if trying to prevent the ritual from succeeding. I chanted the words of the ritual, focusing on driving the entity away and breaking the binding that had tethered it to the restaurant. The figure writhed and screamed, its form becoming more distorted and monstrous. Candles flickered wildly, and the shadows seemed to stretch and elongate, threatening to engulf us. The final moments of the ritual were chaotic and intense. The dark figure let out a final bone-chilling scream before dissipating into the shadows. The oppressive atmosphere in the basement began to lift, and the temperature returned to normal. Exhausted and shaken, I made my way out of the basement, sealing the hidden door behind me. The following day, the Subway restaurant underwent a thorough cleaning and renovation, and the basement was permanently sealed. The hauntings seemed to cease, and the store reopened with a renewed sense of normalcy. The employees and customers reported no further disturbances, and the store returned to its routine. Whiskers, who had been my constant companion through the ordeal, seemed to find solace in the store's newfound tranquility. The experience had left a profound impact on me, a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary places. The Subway restaurant on Elm Street, with its unsettling past, had revealed the terrifying truth that some places carry shadows far deeper than anyone could imagine. Story 2. I am Alex Robert, a 25-year-old culinary arts student who recently started working part-time at a Subway restaurant in a small, aging strip mall on the outskirts of town. The restaurant, named Subway Delights, had seen better days. Its once bright and welcoming exterior was now marred by peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that barely lit up the dimly lit parking lot. The inside was no better, a mix of outdated decor, worn tile floors, and a pervasive, musty odor that clung to the air. I took the job at Subway Delights with hopes of gaining some practical experience and earning a little extra money while I continued my studies. The hours were long, and most of my shifts were during the late evening, when the restaurant was quiet and almost deserted. It was during these late-night shifts that I began to notice something unsettling about me. The initial few weeks of working there were unremarkable. The routine involved preparing sandwiches, cleaning, and restocking supplies. The store was often empty, with only a few stragglers coming in before closing time. Despite the lack of business, I enjoyed the solitude, finding solace in the predictability of the job. But as the days passed, I began to sense that something was off about the restaurant. One crisp autumn evening, as I was preparing to close up, I found a neatly wrapped sandwich on the counter. It was a turkey and Swiss on whole grain bread, but there was no order slip or receipt accompanying it. The store had been empty for hours, and no one had come in to place an order. I checked the security footage, but the cameras showed nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual empty store. I threw the sandwich away, dismissing it as a minor mistake. However, that night, the store's atmosphere began to change. Temperature dropped abruptly, and the fluorescent lights flickered intermittently. The once steady hum of the refrigeration unit seemed to grow louder, creating an eerie background noise that only added to my growing unease. Over the next few weeks, the unsettling occurrences became more frequent. Items on the shelves would disappear and reappear in strange places. The restaurant's temperature seemed to fluctuate wildly, and a faint whispering sound began to accompany the hum of the refrigerators. The whispers were barely audible at first, but they grew increasingly distinct, forming unintelligible murmurs that seemed to echo throughout the store. One night, while I was mopping the floor, I heard soft whispers coming from the back room. I initially attributed the sound to the ventilation system or my imagination, but as the whispers grew louder, they seemed to form coherent words. I ventured into the back room to investigate, but found nothing out of place. The whispers ceased as soon as I entered, leaving me with a sense of lingering dread. Despite my attempts to rationalize the strange occurrences, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The oppressive atmosphere made it difficult to focus on my work, and the whispers continued to haunt me during my shifts. One evening, determined to uncover the source of the disturbances, I decided to explore the back room more thoroughly. I noticed a section of the wall that appeared slightly discolored and felt colder than the surrounding area. Curiosity got the better of me, and I began to pry at the wall. To my surprise, the wall gave way to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside, I found a small, dust-covered room filled with old furniture, discarded items, and a metal box. The box was covered in grime and cobwebs, and when I opened it, I discovered a collection of faded photographs and records. The photographs depicted groups of people from the 1970s enjoying themselves in what appeared to be a party at the restaurant. Their faces were blurred and distorted, creating an unnerving effect. The records contained accounts of a series of mysterious disappearances that had occurred in the late 1970s. Several people had vanished without a trace, and despite extensive investigations, cases remained unsolved. The records described eerie sightings and strange noises reported by staff and patrons. As I read through the documents, a sense of dread washed over me. The descriptions of the disappearances and the unsettling accounts matched the strange occurrences I had experienced. The more I delved into the records, the more oppressive the store's atmosphere became. The whispers grew louder, and the temperature in the restaurant dropped to an icy chill. The once familiar hum of the refrigeration units now seemed to carry an unsettling undertone. I began to sense a presence, a dark, malevolent force that seemed to be lurking just out of sight. One night, as I was preparing sandwiches, I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I turned around, but the store was empty. Feeling of being watched intensified, and the whispers grew louder, forming a dissonant chorus of anguish. Shadows on the walls seemed to stretch and writhe, creating nightmarish shapes that danced in the flickering light. In the kitchen, I found the sink filled with soapy water, despite having never turned it on. The water bubbled and churned as though stirred by an unseen hand. I felt an icy grip on my arm, but when I looked, there was no one there. The oppressive atmosphere grew suffocating, and I struggled to maintain my composure as the feeling of dread continued to build. One particularly disturbing night, the disturbances reached their peak. The store was empty, and I was preparing to close when the lights began to flicker violently. The temperature dropped drastically, and the air became thick with an overwhelming sense of dread. The whispers had turned into a cacophony of tormented cries, and the shadows on the walls grew longer and more distorted. Suddenly, I saw a ghostly figure emerge from the corner of my eye. It was a translucent, shadowy figure of a man with hollow eyes and a twisted, anguished expression. The figure seemed to be reaching out to me, its hand extended in a silent plea for help. The store's atmosphere grew colder, and the whispers turned into a deafening roar of agony. I felt as though I was being pulled into a dark abyss. The figure's presence was suffocating, and I struggled to breathe as if being crushed by an invisible force. The terror was palpable, and every instinct urged me to flee. Desperate to escape, I grabbed the metal box and the photographs from the hidden room and attempted to leave. The store's doors were jammed shut, and the windows were obscured by an impenetrable darkness. The figure's tortured screams echoed in my ears, and the oppressive presence seemed to close in around me. I managed to break free from the store and stumbled out into the night, gasping for breath. The store's lights flickered one last time before going dark, and the malevolent presence seemed to vanish. I fled the area, vowing never to return. In the days that followed, the Subway restaurant was closed and boarded up. The rumors of strange occurrences and ghostly sightings continued to circulate among the locals. New tenants moved into the area. The stories of eerie disturbances persisted. The building remained vacant for years, and the once popular Subway delights became a haunting legend. Years later, I learned that the restaurant had been demolished and replaced by a new establishment. Despite the new construction, the eerie stories persisted among the locals. The new store, despite its modern appearance, could not escape the shadows of the past. Reports of disappearing items, ghostly apparitions, and unsettling occurrences continued to plague the new tenants. The memory of that night at Subway Delights continues to haunt me. The store may be gone, but the terror of my experience remains an indelible part of my psyche. The whispers, shadows, and ghostly figures that plagued the restaurant have left a lasting impression. It serves as a chilling reminder that even the most ordinary places can harbor the darkest secret. Story 3. I am Laura Jennings, a 22-year-old recent college graduate who was thrilled to secure a part-time job at a local Subway restaurant. Having just completed my degree in business management, I was eager to dive into the working world and build some real-life experience. The Subway was located in a quiet suburban area, nestled between a laundromat and a small bookshop. The strip mall was old, but the restaurant itself was clean and well organized. I was excited about the opportunity, seeing it as a stepping stone to bigger things. The first day at work was uneventful. The store was bustling with activity, and I was quickly introduced to my coworkers. There was Tom, the store manager, who seemed to be the epitome of efficiency. Sarah, the assistant manager, was friendly and welcoming, and there were a few other part-time staff who had been working there for a while. The store had a warm, inviting atmosphere, the aroma of freshly baked bread and grilled meats filling the air. The lunch rush was intense, but I managed to keep up with the orders, learning the ropes as I went along. As the shift wound down and the last customers left, I began to settle into the rhythm of closing up. The process involved cleaning the counters, mopping the floors, and making sure everything was in order for the next day. I was alone in the store for the first time, and while I felt a tinge of nervousness, I was also excited about the quiet, peaceful end to my shift. The store was my domain, and I took pride in making sure it was spotless. It was during my second week on the job that the strange occurrences began. The restaurant was typically quiet after 9 p.m., with only a few late-night patrons coming in for a quick bite. I was alone on a Friday night, and as I began the closing routine, I noticed something odd. The store's fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting strange shadows on the walls. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just an issue with the old lighting system. While I was restocking the bread shelves, I saw a chair near the window move slightly. It wasn't a significant movement, just a subtle shift that made me pause and look around. The store was empty, and the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboard. I tried to rationalize it as a draft or perhaps an effect of the lighting, but the feeling of unease persisted. As I continued my work, I heard faint whispers coming from the back room. The storage area was filled with boxes of supplies and cleaning equipment, and I knew there shouldn't have been any noise coming from there. Whispers were soft, almost like murmurs, and they seemed to grow louder whenever I approached the back room. I mustered the courage to check, but there was nothing there. The storage area was as I had left it, neat and orderly. Following week, things took a turn for the worse. It was a quiet Tuesday evening, and I was closing up alone again. As I went about my duties, I noticed something peculiar. Several loaves of freshly baked bread, which I had just restocked, were missing from the display. I had only stocked them an hour before, and now there were only a few left. The thought of a customer sneaking in after hours seemed unlikely, so I reviewed the security camera footage. The video feed showed nothing unusual, no one had entered the store, and the loaves seemed to disappear on their own. I rechecked the footage several times. The result was always the same. The items had vanished mysteriously. I chalked it up to a mistake, Perhaps a miscount, but the unsettling feeling persisted. The temperature in the store seemed to drop suddenly, and I could see my breath forming small clouds in the air. The lights flickered more frequently, and the whispers grew louder. One night, as I was preparing for closing, the doorbell chimed. I looked up, expecting to see a late customer. The store was empty. The doorbell rang again, and I walked over to check. There was no one outside. I returned to the counter and noticed a perfectly made sandwich sitting there. It was neatly prepared with fresh ingredients, but there was no order slip or record of it. The sandwich seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. I threw the sandwich away, feeling a growing sense of dread. The store's lights flickered violently, and the whispers grew louder, almost as if they were trying to communicate something. I glanced around, but there was no one there. The feeling of being watched intensified, and I couldn't shake the sense that something was terribly wrong. As I continued my work, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. A shadowy figure seemed to be sitting at one of the tables. I approached cautiously. The figure vanished before my eyes. The chairs at the table were empty, and the shadow had disappeared. My heart raced, and I tried to rationalize what I had seen. The feeling of dread remained. The store's atmosphere became increasingly oppressive. Shadows seemed to stretch and twist in unnatural ways, and the cold draft that had previously brushed against my neck became a constant, chilling presence. The whispers turned into anguished cries, and I could hear the sound of someone sobbing softly in the back room. I knew I had to confront whatever was causing these disturbances. One night, as I was alone in the back room, the refrigerator door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The sudden noise startled me, and I saw that several items had been scattered across the floor. I picked them up and noticed that one of the containers had dark red stains on it, resembling dried blood. My hands trembled as I realized that the container was covered in something sinister. The shadows seemed to take on a life of their own, moving and contorting in unnatural ways. The whispers became more distinct, and I could hear phrases like, "Help me," and "You're next." The store's lights flickered erratically, casting eerie, shifting shadows on the walls. The air grew colder, and I felt as if I was suffocating under the weight, the oppressive presence. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to stay late one night and investigate. The store was silent, and the only sound was the occasional creak of the floorboard. The lights flickered more violently, and the whispers turned into a cacophony of anguished cries. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread as I made my way to the back room, where the cries seemed to be coming from. The door to the back room creaked open, revealing an empty space. The storage area was cluttered with old boxes and unused equipment, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. I turned around to leave when I saw a blinding red light emanating from the old unused freezer. I approached it cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. As the light subsided, I saw the ghostly figure of a woman standing in front of me. Her face was twisted in sorrow and anger. Her eyes were hollow. She pointed toward the freezer, and I followed her gaze to find a pile of rotting food and moldy bread. At the top of the pile was a journal, pages yellowed and stained. I picked it up, my hands shaking, and began to read. The journal belonged to the previous owner of the restaurant. It detailed a series of strange occurrences and inexplicable events. The owner had documented missing items, mysterious figures, and an oppressive force that seemed to have taken residence in the store. The final entry was a frantic account of the owner's attempt to escape, but it ended abruptly, leaving no resolution. As I finished reading the journal, the store's lights went out completely, plunging me into darkness. The whispers turned into a deafening roar, and the temperature dropped drastically. The ghostly figure of the woman appeared again, her face contorted in agony. She reached out to me, and I felt a cold, invisible grip on my arm. I ran for the door, but it was stuck. The store seemed to close in around me, the walls shifting and closing in. The ghostly figure's cries grew louder, filling the store with an unbearable sense of dread. Desperate, I used all my strength to force the door open and stumbled out into the night. The cold air hit me like a shockwave, and I gasped for breath. I ran to my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life, and I sped away from the store, not daring to look back. The store's lights flickered one last time before plunging into darkness. I never returned to the Subway restaurant. I quit my job the next day, unable to face the store again. The restaurant was eventually closed and boarded up, but no explanation was given for its sudden closure. The building remained empty for months before being demolished and replaced with a new establishment. Years later, I heard rumors that the new tenants experienced similar disturbances. Disappearing items, mysterious figures, and a cold, oppressive presence. The new store's staff reported strange occurrences and an unsettling atmosphere, but no one could explain the cause. I often wonder if the dark force that haunted the Subway restaurant had simply moved on, or if it had been there all along, waiting for its next victim. To this day, whenever I pass by the old location, I feel a chill run down my spine. Story 4. I am Emily Turner, 21-year-old student studying culinary arts. I was thrilled when I landed a part-time job at a local Subway restaurant, especially since the pay was decent and the hours were flexible. The restaurant was in a small strip mall on the outskirts of town, and despite its isolated location, it had a steady flow of customers during the day. I was eager to start. Little did I know that this seemingly mundane job would turn into a nightmare I'd never forget. My first shift began at 4 p.m. The store was a typical Subway. Bright lighting, a counter lined with fresh ingredients, and an array of sandwich-making tools. The smell of bread baking and meat grilling filled the air. For a moment, everything felt normal. I was introduced to my coworkers, a friendly bunch who quickly made me feel at home. Everything seemed perfect until the store's closing time approached. It was my first closing shift, and I was tasked with cleaning up after the last customer had left. The store was quiet, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound breaking the silence. As I wiped down the counters and swept the floor, I noticed a faint rustling noise coming from the back of the store, near the storage room. I dismissed it as the sound of the air conditioning, or perhaps a stray rodent. It was common in older buildings for such noises to be misinterpreted as something sinister. The store's fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Despite my attempts to brush it off, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The clock struck 10 p.m., signaling the end of my shift. My coworker Mike, who had been with the company for a few years, gave me a knowing look. "Just a heads up," he said. "The store has a bit of a history. Nothing serious, just some weird stuff that happens after hours." I raised an eyebrow. "Weird stuff?" "Yeah, like things moving on their own, or lights flickering more than usual. Nothing to worry about, though." I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled in my stomach. Mike's words only seemed to amplify my discomfort. As he left, he reminded me to lock the door securely and double-check everything before heading out. Once Mike left, I started my closing routine. I locked the doors, turned off the lights, and did a final check of the store. Everything seemed in order until I noticed something peculiar. A sandwich was sitting on the counter, perfectly made but untouched. The bread was fresh, the fillings were neatly stacked, but it was the meat that caught my attention. Raw and dripping with an unsettling, almost unnatural sheen. Confused, I checked the order slips and found no record of such a sandwich being made. I glanced around the store, but there was no sign of any customers. A shiver ran down my spine. I hesitated, then carefully discarded the sandwich, deciding it was just an oversight. As I finished cleaning up, the temperature in the store seemed to drop suddenly. The cold was biting, and my breath became visible in the air. I attributed it to the old air conditioning system, but couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread that gnawed at me. The lights flickered more intensely, and the hum of the refrigerator grew louder, creating an eerie cacophony. I heard faint whispers coming from the back room, but when I went to investigate, there was no one there. The storage room was empty, save for boxes of supplies and cleaning equipment. As I returned to the main area, I noticed the cash register was open. I was certain I had closed it earlier. I approached it cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. The drawer was empty, except for a single crumpled receipt. I unfolded it, but the text was smeared and indecipherable. The store's atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. Shadows seemed to move on their own, stretching and contorting as if they had a life of their own. The whispers became louder, more distinct, and I could hear fragments of words. Help me, don't leave, and you're next. I was on edge, my nerves frayed by the relentless unease. The lights flickered violently, plunging the store into darkness before illuminating it with a harsh, flickering glow. I stumbled through the darkness, trying to find my phone to call for help, but it was nowhere to be found. Suddenly, the front door swung open on its own, slamming against the wall with a deafening bang. I froze, staring at the open door, my mind racing. I knew that I had locked it securely. Cold drafts swept through the store, carrying with it a faint, rancid odor that made me gag. I decided to leave the store, but as I made my way to the back door, I heard a loud crash from the front. I turned around to find that the raw meat sandwich had reappeared on the counter, now accompanied by several others, each more grotesque than the last. In a panic, I grabbed my coat and ran for the door, but it slammed shut before I could reach it. The store was now filled with a blinding red light that seemed to emanate from nowhere. The shadows danced on the walls, and the whispers became screams, echoing through the store. The figure from my earlier nightmares materialized in front of me, tall, gaunt silhouette with hollow eyes and a gaping mouth. It moved toward me slowly, its presence suffocating and malevolent. I stumbled backward, my mind screaming for escape. My legs felt like lead. With a final, desperate effort, I reached for the door handle, and to my surprise, it turned. I burst into the cold night air, a breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind me, the store's lights flickered one last time before plunging into darkness. I ran to my car, frantically starting the engine and speeding away from the store. As I drove away, I glanced back one last time. The store was dark and silent, but I could still feel the lingering presence of whatever had been there. I never went back to that Subway restaurant. Quit my job the next day, too terrified to return. The experience left me with a deep-seated fear that I couldn't shake. To this day, I have nightmares about the store, the figure, and the raw meat sandwiches. I've tried to explain what happened to others, but no one believes me. The Subway restaurant was eventually closed down, but the reason for its closure was never publicly disclosed. I've often wondered if the new owners experienced the same horrors that I did, or if they simply left in search of a more mundane job. Every time I pass by the old strip mall, I can't help but feel a shiver run down my spine. The store may be gone, but the memories of that night remain etched in my mind. A haunting reminder of the darkness that lurks behind the ordinary.